Ever lost a deal you thought was in the bag? I'll show you in the next few minutes how you can uncover hidden urgency and close deals faster. It's the difference between hitting your quota and completely missing it. So, in this episode in the Cali Masterclass that I did, you're going to see how to do discovery, how to handle objections, and most importantly, close the deals that you might be losing right now.
Welcome to our third and final episode of our masterclass series, The Art of Cold to Close with Calendly. And we've had a fantastic time with you all so far. And if this is your third episode that you're following us all the way through, we would love to see you in the chat if you've stayed through us the entire time. And then also, if you're coming in new, we always ask where you're tuning in from. Again, we've had people all across the world tune into this 3-part series, and we've learned a lot. So if you've watched the last two, you've learned how to book meetings in multiple places. Now that you have the meeting booked, we need to talk about how you actually can close this deal, right? Because there's no reason to have a big fat pipeline if you're not closing the opportunities. And if you did not get a chance to watch the last two, definitely go do that. But you still can learn a lot here today if you are tuning in with us. And so the main thing that we're going to be talking about today is how do you uncover urgency to drive more sales wins? Throughout all my sales coaching, training, and multiple mentors, we've always had a conversation around you can't create urgency. You can only uncover it to drive urgency to the close. And so there are 4 portions that we're going to be diving into today. One is how do you leverage tech to make sure that you can accelerate your deals? Number 2 is how do you make sure you have deal insurance? We're going to have some fun with that one. 3 is how do you make sure you have clarity after each meeting? And number 4, how do you make sure that you can stay memorable throughout this entire sales process? And so with that being said, let's get into number 1. Now, we're going to talk about tech. We're going to talk about AI. No surprise here. However, for everyone that is listening in, we're going to do another 1 to 5 scale like we've been doing in these episodes. 1 is you're a complete novice and you have no idea what's going on. 5 mean you are extremely proficient in this. When it comes to tech, AI, how often are you using it in your sales cycle? So let me know from 1 to 5 where you stand. Now, as people answer and we're trickling in, AI is one of the most useful things in your entire sales cycle if you use it appropriately. My belief is that if you use AI as a way to understand and navigate your manual task, it will only accelerate and expedite what you do as a seller. So one of the things that I've been really diving deeply into is to get an understanding, how can I take the meetings that I am having, take that information and do follow-up emails and get more information. So what I'll do is I'll have a recording of a call, whatever software you decide to use, and then I take that information and put it into AI to give me follow-up sales emails, to give me the highlights of the call, and to give me areas where I could have improved and done a better job selling or asking better questions. This allows me to not do as much manual work where I have to listen to every single call and figure out exactly what happened and then create this follow-up email. I don't have to do that anymore. I actually just input it into a framework that I built, and it gives me everything that I need. So now I can use the tech to accelerate my own sales cycles, and it gets rid of a lot of the manual task of work that I was doing that was preventing me from doing what I wanted to do, which was have more active selling time, be more intentional with customers, and get in front of the right people. So when you're thinking about how can I get in front of the right customers, how can I make sure I'm navigating my sales cycle the right way, you need to absolutely be paying attention to the AI that you could be leveraging. And that's one example of that. And another example that I've been starting to use is after I have about, let's say, 10 calls, I'll look at all the questions I've been asking and how their responses are and figure out which combination of questions are working the best. The only way you're going to get better as a seller is if you listen to your calls and use that as real-time feedback to be more proficient in your sales cycle. So I'm taking these questions, learning what's working, what's not, how are people responding, and now I can use it as part of my combination of questions that I can ask moving forward. Again, people are going to truly appreciate this from you because now you're asking questions that the buyers really want to answer versus questions that are standard that they're not paying attention to and they draw out. right? So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to how we ask the questions so we get the answers that we are looking for. AI is a fantastic way to distill that down and continuously allow yourself to accelerate in the sales cycle. Now, one additional thing that I want to talk about before we move to the next portion is when you're using AI, it allows you to do a lot of batch work that I mentioned because you want to prevent burnout. Burnout is something that happens a lot within the sales world. I've faced burnout in my sales role. I know a lot of people that I've coached and trained, they face it as well. It's because you're doing so many tasks that you get overwhelmed. And so AI allows you to figure out what task overwhelmed me, putting it through the prompts, putting it through the different systems. So now you can focus on what you do best, which is prospecting, selling, negotiations, all those different things that we are hired and brought in to do. You can now do them at a more proficient rate instead of getting bogged down by the details. So use AI to batch a lot of stuff. I just mentioned I take 10 calls and I figure out the questions are. That wouldn't be possible if I didn't have AI. It would take me hours, days to get that done. Now it takes me minutes to get it done, and I can figure out what I need to do moving forward. So make sure you're batching your work so that you can be more proficient in what you're doing, and you're not sitting there as a leader saying, "Why is my team burning out?" It's because you're not running these different models that will allow you to be more proficient in your questioning. So now that we've talked about AI tech and how you can leverage all those different things to make sure you can get rid of that busy work and that manual task and start focusing more on your active selling, let's get into the selling portion, which is part number 2. Are you making sure that you're guiding conversations in the right way? And do you have deal insurance? Now, what does deal insurance mean? So let's say that you have your first conversation. Most sellers, when they have their first conversation, they're asking their questions. They get to the end of the call to see if they can follow up and get a meeting. And you might just continuously meet with that same person. Well, that's not what we want to do here. We want to find multiple people, multiple stakeholders that we can speak to, so our deal has more insurance. As I always tell people, there's car insurance, there's house insurance, rental insurance, you name it. Why do we not have deal insurance to make sure that the people that we're meeting with are the people that are going to help us close the deal? Because if you don't have the right allies involved, that is going to be a huge deficit when you're talking to your manager or forecasting. Hey, how's this deal going? Yeah, I've been talking to the same person for a couple of weeks. That's not good, right? There's a lot of data that even says out there that 8 to 12 decision makers are involved in a deal. Now, obviously, if you're SMB or things of that nature, you may only have 3 to 4. I understand that. But let's just aim and say, hey, there's 8 to 12 people I got to go talk to. We want as many allies, we want as many stakeholders to make sure that when we're going into different conversations, we have insurance that it's going to be able to close. So I'm always looking at how can I continuously talk to more people in the account so more people are vouching that, hey, we want to work with this team. We want to work with this organization because I now have more people vouching for you. One of the key things that you always want to look out for and why you want to have the insurance is because there's always a healthy skeptic. That doesn't mean that this person is a bad person. It's just they are a skeptic on investing into your service or solution or what it may be because they've made this purchase before and it did not work out well for them. So when we're talking to people and having these conversations, we want to make sure that our deal insurance is there. So one tip that I'll share with you on, make sure that you have deal insurance here. And again, it's not overwhelming for you in this first meeting, is calling it out from the beginning. So yes, there's an element of the upfront contract here, but it's with a twist. So when I start my call, I'll say, hey, this call is going to go 2 ways. One is you find what we have to offer interesting. And it looks from my research that we need to meet with Bob and we need to meet with Samantha. And they are your leaders, it looks like, over demand generation and also over your brand that we need to speak to after this call. And the second option is that you're not interested and it's okay to tell me no throughout this process if this isn't for you. Does that sound fair? Now, at the beginning of the conversation, we have an agreement that, hey, if this is relevant, I'm going to go talk to 2 people in the organization that are the stakeholders. And if it's not relevant, then, hey, look, we part ways as friends and it's fine. The goal is that by setting those 2 stages and those preferences, it allows me to get an understanding of where I need to go moving forward. It puts us all collectively in the right spot. And again, that's why you have to set the stage on that for the right deal insurance so people know exactly what's going on and how they want to have a conversation with you. And so at the end of the call, I always say leave like 7 minutes left so that you can make sure that in this conversation, you're getting your deal insurance that you're looking for. Hey, based on what we talked about so far, it sounds like what makes sense in terms of the next step is to get Bob and Samantha on the next call when would they be free to do that? And one of the best things that you can do here is use the Calendly feature, the meeting polls, right? So now if you need to get multiple people involved, you can send it right there on the call and you can sort it, right? And now you don't have to go back and forth. And I like doing that a lot of the times on my calls is you have a chat function, whatever video service tool that you use, you can easily just drop it in there, right, on the meeting tool and say, hey, here's the meeting polls, here's all our times, and you can sort it from there. Because there could be someone else from your team that needs to get involved, which is another point that I want to add to this. Let's say you're trying to get in front of the legal team or the finance team. If your CFO is cool with it, hey, bring the CFO on the call so they can talk to the finance team and get ahead of procurement and these things of that nature that you're going to run into. So that way the meeting polls allows you to say, hey, we already have the time sorted here. Let's go ahead and just see what times work best for everybody involved. So that's a really good way to get in front of it and have ultimately better conversations, right? From that deal insurance standpoint. Now that you have a lot of deal insurance in play, you may actually have a follow-up as well after this call where they may realize other people may need to get involved. So at the end of the call, they may say, hey, Morgan, Bob and Samantha, we definitely need to talk to them, but Daisy's someone else we need to speak to and have a conversation with on a follow-up email. So now we can use the meeting poll for sure, but we also can use the collective event because we want to move with speed here. And that's the key. That's why you want to use these different Calendly features and functions because you want to be able to move with speed. You don't want to be overwhelmed here. So now I'm going to say, hey, oh, cool. Let's use the collective event and let's get, maybe someone on my team. Maybe I need to get my head of partnerships, or maybe I need to get someone in marketing involved, or someone on production team. Who knows? But maybe that other person, Daisy, is from another department. So I got to bring someone else from my department so they can speak the same language. And that's the really big benefit of the insurance selling here is that you want to bring people from your organization that they can meet too. So it's not just you. They have multiple touch points and people that they're speaking to, and they get more a feel and aura of what your company is about. And so in this entire example, you want to make sure that you're the driver in the scenario and that the prospect is not the driver. Because if they're the driver, they can lead you astray and put you in a spot that you don't want to be in. That's why we want to drive the conversations, have the right stakeholders involved. And then as we learn about new stakeholders, we can use these different features and functions like a meeting poll or like a collective event to continuously drive the conversation. Now we're going to go into the third portion of this episode, which is making sure that you're getting clarity and you're not going into mistiness. I don't know if you've ever been in fog before where you're in it, you know you need to get out of it, but you can't see anything at all. And that is what happens. I've experienced this before in most sales cycles. It's like, I know this is misty. I don't really know where to go. I should have maybe asked for some clarity. I should have set up appropriate steps, but I'm going to try to figure it out, but it might end up being a closed loss. So now what we want to do is make sure, how do we uncover this urgency here and create some clarity in what we're doing, right? And this is where we're really going to dive into it to get a better baseline and understanding of how to actually do this. So there are two different ways on how to make sure that you're setting clarity in your sales cycles. One is the agenda you send before the call, and two is what you're asking in the call itself. So this is where we're going to get into the meat of it so that you can get a better understanding of how urgency is going to happen, right? Because we've already essentially talked about how you can get the right things with the stakeholders, right? We talked about how you can make sure that you have the deal insurance, but let's dive into the agenda. So this is very, very simple. Yeah, very important. Setting an agenda before your call. So it may look something like this. Hey, Bobby, looking forward to meeting you tomorrow. Here's an agenda of what we're going to cover. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you want to lay that out so people know exactly what you're looking to cover and how you're looking to go about it. So then once you have those things laid out, you want to send that 24 hours so the potential client knows exactly where they're getting into and they don't feel like this is going to be a normal sales conversation that they typically would have. This is going to show people that you have intention, you're being thoughtful, and you're going to stand out amongst the noise, which is what we want to be able to do here. So when you send this 24-hour agenda, you want to make sure that you keep things a little bit open too. So I might do 1, 2, 3, 4, but then leave 5 open so that they can fill in whatever they want to fill in. I also will take that same information and put it inside of the calendar invite. Now, inside of the meeting itself, to get more clarity, when you are looking to have this conversation, we want to make sure that questions are already answered before we get into the meeting. So one of the key features and functions of Calendly is you can create custom questions. So within your 24-hour agenda email you're going to send, you could also send a link too and say, hey, could you answer these questions before our call so we can have an impactful conversation? Now, some of you may be like, well, that seems like a lot of work. Well, no, it's not. We're actually preparing the potential client to answer questions ahead of time that we were probably going to ask as our qualification phase. So now we can get past all that information and I don't have to ask you on the call, and we can get right into the use case and the business case of how we can help you potentially. And so you want to add that in there because that's another way to uncover this urgency, right? We're not going to be able to figure this out unless we understand our business case, and that allows you to get to the questions faster, which then leads into part number 2 of what I was talking about. So when you're on your call, I already talked about at the beginning, you could ask this question to upfront contract, and at the end, you're looking for more meetings. But another way to provide clarity is asking questions that allow you to see things a lot differently. So I have 3 questions that I love to ask that you can use as well. Now, when it comes to discovery and getting clarity, because that's really what it is, right? Discovery is uncovering urgency to get clarity to see how we're going to drive moving forward. Shout out to Alex from Reach Desk on this one. He said, hey, when you're doing discovery, it should feel like a workout. And you should come out of it being a little bit tired and exhausted because you were digging for pain and you were having such great dialogue. So that's what we want to aim for here. However, these 3 questions can get you in that direction. So number 1, I like to ask people, what happens if you don't make this decision? Another thing you can do, we've talked about this before in one of our other episodes, which is, hey, look, I don't want this to be a crazy question, but what would happen if you don't move forward with this, right? We want to get an understanding of how much pain is truly there. I've had people answer say, hey, you know what? Like, if we don't implement this program or this initiative, I might not have my job. All right, well, you just uncovered your urgency. Some people might say, hey, if we don't implement this, nothing happens. Okay, so I need to do more digging to figure out what other initiative we need to talk about. So these are just things that you can keep in mind when you ask that question. Number 2 is decision criteria. So you want to ask, what is your decision criteria when you make decisions like this? You want to see have they made previous decisions based on this solution or service before. If they haven't, you're in new territory. And so what you need to do is guide them on what it typically looks like. Hey, typically when people invest into this solution or service, here's their decision criteria on where they decide to go. Now, if it's us, that's great. If it's someone else, this is what they look at. So now, again, you're the guide in this scenario, right? And notice a lot of this uncovering stuff is just you being a guide, right? We're guiding them towards the right path of where we want them to go and what we'd like for them to do, right? And if we could get them to do that, then that's going to be absolutely critical on how you're going to make sure that they are getting these things done. And so the other question that you want to ask is, when are you looking to get something like this implemented? And that's it. We don't ask any additional questions off that, right? You're just going to say, hey, when would you like to get this implemented, right? So that gives you a barometer on if it's 4 months, if it's 5 months, now you can figure out where that urgency is. Now, based on their answer, by the way, you could ask a layering question. Hey, okay, let's just say right now it's March. And they say, hey, we want to implement this at the end of April. You could be like, hey, what's the reason that you want to get this done by the end of April? What's the pressing use case here? Another question you ask, who else in the organization, what other departments are also looking into this initiative? That allows you in the future state to then get more budget, more insurance. You're uncovering urgency now. Because if 3 departments want to do this initiative, that's probably important for the entire organization. So it's also important to figure out what other departments are looking to do this initiative, and you're now having more conversations. That's more budget, right? That's more people, right? And so now you're in a better spot. So that's how we make sure we provide clarity in the missiness that we're in across the board. And what I will also tell you as a big proponent of this is when you're looking to get clarity, make sure, and I said this earlier, but I'm say it again, to get that 7 minutes at the end of your meeting so you can drive the next steps. You should be saying, hey, typically, this is who we're meeting with next. You should get next steps right there on the calendar, and you should move forward from there. And then as you do all of your follow-ups, which we'll talk about in section 4 here, as you do all your follow-ups, you want to make sure that they're timely, appropriate, and it also gets them excited, right? Because they now have clarity on what their problem is. And how do you make sure that you understand on what people's problem is? So you want to do something that I am so excited that I learned. And it's something that is going to be like, wait, that's sounds pretty easy. It is pit stops. Now, they have them in Formula One, they have them in NASCAR. When they go around the race, they can't just keep going around and around and around. They gotta have a pit stop. So typically every race they have about 1 to 3 pit stops. This is where they change the tires and make sure the fuel's good, the gas, whatever it may be. So you, as a rep, need to also be doing pit stops. And sales leaders, you should be telling your reps to do this as well. About 15 minutes into your initial discovery call, a call typically is 30, 45 minutes. So let's say 15, 20 minutes. You're gonna say, hey, this is what I've learned so far. What I've learned so far is you're looking to tackle this initiative. You have all these other departments that want to be involved. You're looking to invest at this timeline. And I just want to make sure all this is accurate before we move forward. So what you want to hear is say, oh, Morgan, that's accurate. What that does is it creates like a confirmation bias. And psychologically, now they're bought into whatever you have to tell them. Or they say, some of this is accurate, but here are the things that are not accurate. And here's what we actually want to talk to you about. So now you have an understanding of you missed a couple things, which is fine, because now you have time to dive into them and recover on this call to figure out how you actually move forward and get the sell, right? And so those are the different skills. Those are the different things you can be doing to make sure that you have clarity, right, in that mistiness, and that you're uncovering urgency to drive urgency moving forward. Important thing to note before we move on to how to make your meetings more memorable pre and also post between all the interactions is you want to address concerns at the end of a call. This is actually how you make sure that your urgency is going to be there. At the end of every call, what I always ask is, are there any potential concerns or roadblocks that could occur as we have these conversations? Because it's very easy to have happy years. Like, that was a fantastic call. We want to see, are there any concerns or roadblocks that we need to tackle before we actually get off this call? Because there always is something we just need to know. What information, what case studies do we need to get? Do we need to bring someone else involved? And if you realize it's like not a good deal, always be okay to walk away from the deal, right? Sometimes you may not be able to uncover urgency. Sometimes you may realize this is actually not a good opportunity for us. Go find someone else who could also be a part of that opportunity and understands your use case and things of that nature. Not every deal can be won, to be fair. We want to, but not every deal can be won. So that's why we want to ask concerns, roadblocks. Can you even address those concerns and roadblocks and make sure you can go from there? Now, the final portion of this is how to make sure that you remain memorable past the meeting. Most decision makers and executives have a ton of meetings every single day and every single week, and they can quickly forget you. So if they can quickly forget you, how do you make sure that you remain memorable throughout the process? Well, one of the key ways that I always recommend people do is send a video after the conversation and recap what happened. Hey, real quick, 1 to 3 minutes. Here's everything we talked about. Here's what's going on. That's really good, especially if you had a one-to-one conversation. And let's say you were looking to book the meeting with 2 other stakeholders. They can see your face, they see your tone, they understand what you're about, and now you can have just a better dialogue and ultimately a better conversation, right? This also is great when you've met with multiple people saying, hey, what's going on? Here's what we talked about. Recap it, show different use cases. You can go from there. Another thing I like to do to remain memorable post-meeting, let's say it's meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3, it doesn't really matter. I like to ask people, 2-second video, 30-second video. This isn't that long. Say, hey, thanks so much for hopping on the meeting today. Real quick, did you have any comments or questions that you could not answer in front of the group? Some people don't want to ask or present a concern in front of a group of people, but they're willing to answer it in a one-to-one setting. So that's why I like to send that video to say, hey, is there anything that you had a question or concern or comment on that we weren't able to talk to in a group setting? Some people feel more comfortable to do it in a one-to-one setting. And so that's a way that you can remain memorable throughout this process. Another thing that I like to do as well is Slack Connect. Slack is a great way to connect with people if they don't want to give you their number. Now, I always like to get their number so we can text, but some people don't want to do that. So I say, hey, is it easier for us to connect in Slack? That way I can send information to them. It's easy to talk to them very quickly instead of going back and forth in email. So just another way that you can connect that isn't text, that doesn't make them feel like you're invading their privacy, because you may not know that person that well yet, obviously. But Slack is a good way to be like, hey, let's communicate here, right? And you can remain memorable in that form or fashion. One of the things to make sure that you can keep track of all these things that I'm talking about is Calendly workflow. So you can actually set reminders to send out an email, right? 24 hours beforehand with an agenda. You can also do it the day of, right? To send a reminder. You also, as well, can set a reminder to send things post the meeting, whether it's a video or an email. So the workflow is just a really good way to remind yourself and also automate those tasks that we talked about. So you're not sitting there feeling burnt out, overwhelmed. This can be as part of your process. And then now it's easier to navigate these relationships. One thing I want to mention here when it comes to being memorable in meetings is making sure that you are guiding them on the beginning of every single call. So this is meeting 2, meeting 3, meeting 4, it doesn't really matter. Every call you want to start off and say, hey, what's changed since our last conversation? Even if it was 2 days ago, we know how fast the world moves. There's a lot of things that could have changed. So I'm asking this question to see, like, has anything changed? What's been going on? What's happening? Once we're able to do that and get that answer, that's when I'll recap what has happened in our previous calls. Again, people have so many different meetings. You need to tell them what's going on, because this is how you're going to uncover urgency. Again, because someone could say, hey, 2 days ago, we had a meeting with the CEO and here's the things that are happened. You wouldn't get this insight unless you ask this question. So now that you get the context, you share the context of what's been happening so far. Hey, in our past couple meetings, here's everything we've covered. I know we have X, Y, and Z person on the call today that's new. What's something that you want to touch on that I did not talk about here? Now we can get information from them. We can ask Larry questions to those people. And now we can drive more sales wins that way, right? So the key here is being memorable is all about making sure that you have touch points that are different. Videos, asking questions at the beginning of the call, make sure you have workflows, Slack Connect. You can even do voice notes inside Slack Connect too if you need to describe something. They have a transcript inside of there now. So you could have a lot of fun with this. But my whole thing is, remember on your post, let's send some videos. Let's make sure that we're doing things that are going to be different. And like I mentioned, are you setting that agenda beforehand and letting them know what's going on? And something that most people will miss, and I missed this myself as well, is don't just do this on the first meeting. Do this on the second meeting. Send the agenda for the second meeting. Hey, here's what we're covering on the second meeting. Here's what we're covering on the third meeting. Make sure everyone knows what's going on, because I've realized even if I had a conversation with someone, they could have completely forgot to relay that information over to the next person I wanted to talk to, and we end up wasting a meeting and wasting time. So that is how you uncover urgency with the 4 portions that I just broke down. And now you know exactly how to drive more sales wins. And we're super excited to have done this 3-part series with you all. And I hope, again, you have some amazing takeaways that you can use moving forward as you dive more into your sales process.